I still hear the howling winds of that night. It's been years since I ventured into the forests of the Great Lakes, and yet the memory claws at me like an itch I can't scratch. It started as a simple camping trip with a few friends, a chance to escape the chaos of modern life and embrace the wilderness. But nothing could have prepared me for what awaited us there, in the deep woods where no light from civilization could reach. The first sign of something wrong came when we made camp. The air was unusually still, almost as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Our campfire crackled, and shadows danced against the trees, but something gnawed at the edges of my mind. It was the stories the locals had told us before we left the small town, tales of a creature that haunted these very woods. The Wendigo. I shrugged it off as superstition. The Wendigo was nothing more than a myth, a cautionary tale to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. But the fear in the old man's eyes who had warned us there was something in his gaze that made me uneasy. He spoke of the Wendigo like it was a real flesh and bone thing, something that could be summoned by hunger, an insatiable hunger that drove men to madness. That night, as I lay in my tent, the sounds of the forest seemed different. The usual rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, it all seemed muffled, distant. But then, I heard it a low, guttural growl. At first, I thought it was a bear or some other animal, but the sound wasn't quite right. It was too deep, too human. Suddenly, there was a scream, not from a wild animal, but from one of my friends. I shot up from my sleeping bag and rushed outside. The campfire had dimmed, and in the shadows, I saw him, Jacob, standing frozen, staring into the trees. His eyes were wide with terror. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I saw it. It was watching me." We all gathered, our flashlights shaking in our hands, scanning the darkness around us. But there was nothing. No creature, no sign of anything that could explain the panic in Jacob's face. He was pale, his breath shallow. He looked like he had seen a ghost. But it wasn't a ghost. It was worse. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped and the growling sounds continued. Closer now, almost as if it were circling us. And then we saw it. A figure, tall, gaunt, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It was standing on two legs, but its limbs were twisted, unnatural. Its skin was stretched tight, like something barely held together by skin and bone. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque, hungry grin. The Wendigo. It was real. I don't know how I managed to escape, but somehow I ran. We all ran, and as I fled, I heard the voice of the Wendigo calling out its growl, vibrating in my chest. It craved more than just flesh. It craved the souls of those who dared to cross into its domain. I never returned to those woods, but every night, when the wind howls through the trees, I hear it again, its hunger calling out in the dark. And I know, deep down, that the Wendigo is still out there, waiting.